friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today I'm going to be talking about audiobooks and my opinions on them and why I'm struggling to figure out if I like them or not. And I would love to make this the start of a discussion down in the comments because I know that there are so many people in the reading community who love audiobooks, who depend on audiobooks, who perform amazing audiobooks. Now, I seriously struggle with audiobooks, and I'm honestly not really sure why, because when I was a kid, I used to fall asleep to audiobooks all the time. I used to listen to audiobooks every single night, sometimes during the day when I was working on things, but especially at night when I was going to sleep, and I would listen to them for an hour or two before I fell asleep. And I remember not being able to wait until I could go back to the library to get my favorite audiobooks. My favorite two that I remember very specifically were Old Yeller and Black Beauty, which now as an adult doesn't really surprise me, but those were the two that I probably listened to the most. I remember falling asleep to Old Yeller for like years. That probably says a lot about me as a person and explains a lot about me as a writer and reader now. After my childhood, I kind of fell off the audiobook train and I never really went back. I've never really listened to podcasts. I don't do that thing where I put YouTube videos on in the background, like I have to be watching them in order to want to sit down and watch a video or listen to somebody talk about something. So I've just been kind of having an interesting time looking at what it is about audiobooks that I find difficult now as an adult, and I'm not really sure where that disconnect happened between my childhood and now. But the first thing that I want to say before I get into all of my opinions and the things that I've tried is I want to make a huge disclaimer statement right now that there are certain people on the outskirts of the community who don't believe that reading audiobooks is reading. Get out of here with that. Moving right along, now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about my struggle with focus, because I think that was one of the things that really has been a big hurdle for me in listening to audiobooks. I really struggle to focus when it comes to auditory input. So back when I was in college, I had a really hard time with auditory learning even then. So if I was sitting in a classroom and the professor was talking, if I didn't have a way to engage and immerse in what the professor was talking about, whether that was, note-taking, very specific note-taking, or a hands-on project, or something that involved me in what was going on, I had a really, really hard time retaining any of the information. And when I'm reading a book, that visual input retains for me so much better. And I found when I was starting to listen to audiobooks again, if I wasn't just focused on the audiobook and I, started doing something else, that I would lose whole chunks of the audiobook and I would have to go back and re-listen because I missed 5 to 10 minutes of whatever was going on. Because you'll hear a lot of people who will put on an audiobook while they're working or while they're doing something else, and for whatever reason, I don't have an easy time with that. The only time that I have found that works for me is when I'm going on walks, which winter in Minnesota isn't super conducive for going on walks and listening to audiobooks. So during the warmer parts of the year, I definitely want to get back into that and try to pick up some audiobooking again. But when it comes to doing housework or while I'm working or anything like that, I can't do it. My husband will listen to audiobooks all day. And so I have a lot of friends who do that too when they're doing like data entry jobs and whatever, and they have an audiobook going on in the background. I can't do that. I'm not really sure why, but I can't do that. It was kind of, I'm going to segue just briefly because it kind of factors in. When the audiobook came out for my book, The Bloodstones, it was a completely new experience for me because when my good friend and narrator Andrew Meredith asked me to send him some kind of clips of people that I thought of when I heard, certain characters, like what does this character sound like? I had a massive mental wall that I hit with that because I realized I don't have any kind of auditory experience when I'm reading. None. Like, I don't hear the voices of the characters. I don't hear the environment that they're in. I don't hear anything. I don't have any, my imagination doesn't fill in any of the auditory input of the story at all. So when I listened to my own audiobook for the first time, it was a little emotional because I was like, this is the first time I've ever heard this character's voice. even in my imagination, like I didn't have anything in that space, and now suddenly here's this character coming alive in a completely different way than I ever have experienced them before. So I don't know if that's normal. So please in the comments let me know if you also struggle with auditory input, because I know that there's a lot of different ways that we experience stories when we're reading, and for some people they don't have any visuals. They don't imagine any visuals when they're reading, and apparently for some people, me included, there's no auditory imagination involved with those stories. Some people read the story in their mind while they're going through the physical text. Some people don't. I don't do that. My husband does. So there's so many different ways that we experience these stories. And for me, for whatever reason, auditory just isn't, it doesn't work. So one of the things that I've been told by quite a few people is that it is a learned skill, and that is definitely something that I believe. So I'm slowly working on acclimating myself to audiobooks, because I do want to be able to listen to them, and especially be able to listen to fantasy novels on audio. So let's talk about length of book for starters, because this is something that I'm still struggling with. I read chunky books, you guys. Like, I don't flinch at an 800 to 1,000 page book. I've read a bunch of them. They don't scare me. And when I see a chunky book, the page numbers don't feel insurmountable to me. You know, I just kind of break it down by every 100 pages, and I don't let myself mentally go past that until I've reached page 100 or page 200, then I can move forward. When it comes to an audiobook, when I see something like 43 hours, I shut down. Like, my brain just shuts down at that number, and I'm so intimidated by large novels on audio, which is weird because I read them all the time. And when you read fantasy, a lot of the books are well over 20 hours long, and like, I balk at that so much because I just feel like that's so insurmountable, and I'd rather just pick it up and read it physically. On that note though, with fantasy, I've had a harder time with audiobooks, and so I kind of did a little experimenting to see if there was a different genre that I could intake better than the fantasy novels. And I tried a lit RPG. I read Dungeon Crawler Carl, performed by the incredibly talented Jeff Hayes, and while the story was not my favorite for reasons that I talk about in my review, I like the kind of audio drama performance of it, because I feel like with the multiple voices, or even sometimes multiple narrators performing the story, it's a more immersive experience. I remember listening to an audio drama of Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere back in college that I absolutely loved, that I think James McAvoy plays the main character, and there's just a whole bunch of really famous actors and actresses who contributed to that performance, and it was really cool, and I loved that. So I think it gives me more of a variety for my brain to kind of engage with more, and it's not just a single narrator through the whole book. Weirdly, the one genre that I have found I actually immerse with better when it comes to audiobooks is memoirs. I started listening to memoirs late last year, and I've listened to several of them now, and I find that I have a much easier time listening to memoirs because I feel like I'm in conversation with the person who's reading the story. I recently listened to Tom Felton's memoir, Beyond the Wand, where he talks about his experience playing Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter films and his experience growing up in that kind of an environment. And I really, really enjoyed that because I already had a pre-existing connection to those stories and to the character and the actor who plays him. I think that helped because there was already this immersive connected factor that I had to that story that was being told. But memoirs have, historically been a little bit easier for me to digest than the larger fantasy novels have been. So I have been picking out a memoir every once in a while to listen to, and I specifically audiobook those as much as I can, which I actually really like, and it's giving me an excuse to read more memoirs, which is never a bad thing because I really like them, and I honestly don't give them enough space on my TBR. But that brings me to another thing that people talk a lot about with audiobooks, and that is the speed. at which we listen. I am a skim reader. When it comes to physical reading, I read between like 400 and 500 words per minute. And the average, I think, is like 250 to 300. I can't remember exactly what it is. I might be slightly off on those numbers, but it's something like that. So I do physically read very quickly. You would think that that would translate to playing faster audiobooks, but it doesn't, and I'm not really sure why. Probably because the auditory input is hard for me and it's not the same as that visual speed reading that I can do. The auditory input, I really struggle to process what's being said when it's fast. So I have worked myself up to a 1.2, and every once in a while, depending on the narrator, I'll do a 1.5. But I know so many people who listen to audiobooks at like 2 and 3 times speed. You guys are nuts! How do you do that? That's crazy. I really struggle. And this is like me trying to up my audiobook speed over the span of an entire novel or multiple novels, and it's really not getting that much faster, you guys. Like anytime I go over 1.5, even 1.5 is pushing it sometimes, I really struggle to process what's being said. I'm not able to match my visual reading speed with my audiobook reading speed. And I think part of that is just because for me personally, inputting those two different modes of storytelling are vastly different. One I have a really easy time with, one I really struggle with. So with all of this, how on earth am I ever supposed to love audiobooks? And I don't really feel like I'm forcing myself to read audiobooks. It is something that I genuinely want to experience more of and see if I can learn to kind of settle into it a little bit more. I like a challenge. I don't like when I feel like I am not able to do something. So I definitely have been prioritizing this last year, choosing specific audiobooks that I think I will enjoy that aren't quite as long. I've been really careful not to do anything much over 20 hours when it comes to audiobooks because it gives me a sense of accomplishment when I can listen to the audiobook and finish it and not feel like I've got, 3 days of audiobook left. So it is something that I am prioritizing in my reading because I think that there's such a rich world of storytelling and performance when it comes to audiobooks. And I want to be able to experience that. I want to be able to listen to these incredible narrators perform characters that I love in these stories. And I think that that's a really important part of our reading community. So I definitely am still focusing on making sure I'm making space in my reading every month for a little bit of audiobooking, even if it's something short. And memoirs have been really helping, as I mentioned with that. Memoirs have been a good entry point for me with that. But I don't know. I feel like I'm on a quest, honestly. I feel like I'm on a quest to discover my love of audiobooks, and I do feel like it might be out there somewhere. I just need to find it. But I would love to know down in the comments, please let me know your experience with audiobooks versus visual reading. How do you prefer to digest your reads? Do you audiobook almost exclusively? Because I have friends who do that. Do you struggle with audiobooks like I do? And have you figured out why? I would really like to hear more about you guys' experience with audiobooks and just talk about how that works for everybody, because I know we're all very different and everyone's individual experience with these different modes of storytelling is going to be very different. Anyways, that was a little bit of a rambly video for you guys today, but it was something that's been kind of percolating in the back of my head for a while, and I wanted to talk to you guys about audiobooks and share a little bit about my struggles with them, because sometimes I feel a little bit like an island out here because I'm surrounded by people that love and listen to audiobooks on a regular basis, and I don't actually think I know a ton of people who struggle with audiobooks to the same level that I do. So I would love to hear about your experiences, whether positive or negative, with audiobooks. Also, let me know who some of your absolute favorite audiobook narrators are. I'd love to know if there was a certain gateway audiobook that made you love audiobooks. Let me know down in the comments what that was, because I'd love to know. Here's to learning to love audiobooks. It's an ongoing process, but we'll get there eventually, I hope. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week, and whether you are visually reading or listening to your reads, I hope they are 5 stars and fabulous, and I will see you guys in the next video.